Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Questions and Answers. Today is Sunday, June the 23rd. It's a gorgeous day out. I'm here poolside at Casa de Pardo. Actually, it's called Chateau de Pardo by a lot of people who come here and visit us, friends and family. So poolside by the Chateau. We got a bunch of questions you guys have sent in from the last 2 weeks. Some really good ones, so I'm going to try and get to as many as I can today. So why don't we get started? So the first one here is from Tate Davis. Hey Pete, my question this time is about Blue Cheer. What is your opinion on their album output starting with Outside Inside when the band moved somewhat away from the heavy sound on Vincebus Eruptum and experimented with other styles? Keep up the great work. Yeah, I mean, I have all the Blue Cheer albums, and it's amazing how different they all are. So the first album, obviously Vincebus Eruptum, is a pioneering album in kind of like heavy rock, acid rock. Could perhaps be the birth of heavy metal right there. A lot of volume, a lot of distortion, fuzz, loud-ass album. I heard they were excruciating live in that day. If you saw them on that tour, I heard they were like the loudest band on the planet. But their next album, Outside Inside, they still had some of those elements, but you could tell they were moving away from that sound a bit. It's a very strong album. So then they followed that up with New Improved in 1969, Blue Cheer, self-titled also in 69, The Original Human Being in 1970, and Oh, Pleasant Hope in 71. So that was all their output until they got back together in 84. So I actually kind of like those albums, but they are nothing like the first two albums, and especially nothing like the first album. I think New and Improved is actually a pretty strong album. That's from early 69, but very kind of typical of the San Francisco sound of that period. Kind of like that garage rock, psychedelic and blues. Think like Jefferson Airplane, Hot Tuna, a little bit of Creedence, that sort of thing. Very strong. The self-titled album, also from the same year, very similar. Also a good album, some good tunes. I think probably my favorite of all of those post-Outside Inside albums is probably The Original Human Being from 1970. Little bit more hard rock on that album, hard rock, classic rock, whatever you want to call it, the acid rock thing. Not quite as kind of garagey or psychedelic, more of kind of like a streamlined rock sound on that album. I find that to be my favorite post Outside Inside and before the 80s reunion. The Oh Pleasant Hope album from 71, not a big fan of that album. It's very folky. It's got kind of like that country rock thing permeating into their sound, which was becoming big at the time. You can hear little hints of like the Dead and the band especially. I hear a lot of influences of the band on that album. A little bit of like Dylan, as Dylan was starting to go electric, that kind of thing. But then, they get back together and they released that The Beast Is Back album in 1984, which was on Megaforce Records, which was a pretty, up-and-coming big heavy metal label at the time. And here's where the band kind of went back to their early heavy roots and started to maybe kind of perpetuate that whole stoner rock thing that we started to see like later in the 80s and into the 90s and up to today. That's a pretty strong album. And then, you had a couple other albums. What else we got? Highlights and Lowlives, 1990, so a little bit of a break there, but the band were touring quite a bit. Dining with the Sharks in 91, and then another big, long break, and then they released What Doesn't Kill You in 2007. All those albums, again, kind of have that whole stoner, hard rock and boogie type of thing going on with, original members, Dickie Peterson on bass and vocals, as well as Paul Whaley on drums. And I think every one of those albums had a different guitar player on, so it was like a revolving door of guitarists. But really, decent stuff, and, the band kind of just sat there on the underground, just still doing their thing, and then, Dickie died in 2009 from prostate cancer, and that was kind of the end of that. But there has been a Blue Cheer or the new Blue Cheer or something like that playing quite a bit. I'm not even sure who's in that band or that lineup, but yeah, a really cool band that I would say, if you've heard mixed things about their late 60s, early 70s output, go check it out. Go investigate. All the albums are available in full on YouTube for you to listen to. There's some good stuff in there. Very different, though. Don't expect Vincebus Eruptum. From TBLS04, Pete, I enjoy your channel. Thank you very much. Do you have any favorite songs or albums by R&B bands that feature some guitar, like Late Side Funkadelic, Isley Brothers, Ready for the World, Zapp, Mother's Finest, etc.? Thanks. Yeah, I actually do like some of that stuff. So I really like that mid-70s period, Isley Brothers. Of course, with the great Ernie Isley on guitar. So specifically the albums Go For Your Guns. It's a very strong album. Live It Up is great. 3+3 is great, and The Heat Is On. Those are kind of my favorite Isley Brothers 70s albums. And again, some really good funky hard rock guitar work from Ernie Isley, who obviously his idol was Jimi Hendrix. And you can hear like little bits of Robin Trower in his playing as well. A really, really good player. And if you haven't checked out Ernie's solo album, High Wire, which was released in the late 80s, that's a really good rock album. Again, with a little bit of funk and blues on it, but really, really tasty stuff. How about Funkadelic? You know, Eddie Hazel, man, what a great player. You got, Maggot Brain, some of my favorite Funkadelic albums. From, again, we're talking early, mid-'70s, late '70s. Maggot Brain, Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow. Cosmic Slop is great. Standing on the Verge of Getting It On, that's such a great tune also. Hardcore Jollies is strong, and One Nation Under a Groove. And if you like screaming kind of blues rock guitar in the vein of Jimi Hendrix, man, you can't go wrong with Eddie Hazel. Fantastic stuff. In the same vein, a lot of the same players kind of drifted in and out of Funkadelic. And Parliament. Parliament were another, you had George Clinton and Bernie Worrell and Bootsy Collins. I mean, both of those bands kind of were like, two different outlets for a lot of the same players. Mothership Connection's a great Parliament album. The Clones of Dr. Funkenstein is good. Motor Booty Affair. Glory Hall is Stupid. Good stuff. Some of the guitar players of note in the Parliament band were Michael Hampton, really good player, Gary Scheider, and Glenn Goins. And they had a bunch of other guys, but those were like the three main dudes. How about the Brothers Johnson? Look Out for Number One, Right on Time. Those are really good albums. More pure funk and R&B, less rock, but still really good. And some, George Johnson, one of the two brothers, a fantastic guitar player. So good stuff there. I've heard some bits of Mother's Finest. That's pretty good, too. Ready for the World and Zap, I've never heard, or Lakeside, but I probably should investigate some of that. From Fusey Music, hey, Pete, what do you think of Spirogyra? Greetings from Germany. Okay, well, I'm hoping that you're talking about the Spirogyra, the New York jazz fusion band, and not the folk band from the very early 70s, because I've never heard the folk band before, but I've heard of them. But, yeah, I like Spirogyra, the jazz fusion band, quite a bit. In fact, Morning Dance, Catching the Sun, Carnival, Incognito, Point of View, Alternating Currents. Probably the cream of the crop as far as their studio albums go. Seen them live a couple times. Really, really great band. They, for me, are like a perfect combination of like smooth jazz and pop and jazz fusion. They were never daring enough to be a straight jazz fusion band because they had a lot of kind of pop elements going on in their music. But they arguably could be considered one of the first, kind of like smooth jazz bands, right? Really good players, Jay Beckenstein and the whole crew, great sax and keyboards and guitar and just great rhythms, great melodies, really good melodies. I always really liked them a lot. They're, along with the Rippingtons, probably my favorite of that kind of jazz fusion band, more of the smooth jazz fusion, I guess if you want to call it. From Rick Labonte, Pete, I always enjoy your shows for over a year now. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it, Rick. You have turned me on to many great bands such as Flower King, Spock's Beard, Angel, Blood Rock, etc. I was wondering what you could recommend must-buy CD for a band you've mentioned in previous programs I don't know much about, called Glass Hammer. All right, so Glass Hammer have, I'm going to say around 15 albums, at least that, maybe one or two more, something like that. It's over a dozen. I would say almost all of them are really strong. So I'm going to steer you towards perhaps my favorite five, and that's a good place to start. The one good thing about Glass Hammer is that they've had a lot of different vocalists throughout their career, and they're all really strong. And I think I'm going to give you some albums from with a bunch of different singers on them as a way for you to kind of get your feet wet with Glass Hammer. So Lex Rex is a very strong album. Shadowlands, also quite good. Core Codium is very good. That, I believe, is the first album with John Davison, who now sings for Yes. Perilous, also very good. And Chronometry, also quite good. But, man, you can't go wrong with any of them. So you could arguably start with their more recent stuff and work your way back, or vice versa. But those, for me, probably my favorites, but I like them all. So, but yeah, Lex Rex, Shadowlands, Core Codium, Perilous, and Chronometry. Great place to start. And let me know what you think. From Nick Usofian. Hey, Pete, thanks for the content. It's really appreciated. You're welcome. I've noticed you have a Blu-ray of Shin Godzilla on your shelf. Yeah, not behind me today, but yes, I do. I'm just wondering what you think of Bear McCreary's renditions of Akira Ifukube's themes and cover of Godzilla by BOC and Godzilla King of the Monsters, and what you thought of the movie. Okay, So let's tackle the movie first. I really enjoyed the movie a lot. I am a lifelong fan of giant monster movies, horror, classic horror monsters, Godzilla in particular. I own every Godzilla movie ever made. Big fan. And I really enjoyed the new movie. You know, for me, it was just great to see all those, you know, Rodan and Mothra and Ghidorah and a couple others that they threw out in there. Great to see them back in the films again. I loved it. A lot of great monster battles. I like kind of how it sets up the, spoiler alert, not potential, it's going to happen, Godzilla versus Kong film. But my guess is, based on the final scene, if you stay till the end of the credits, you know, they show what's potentially going to be the big villain in that film. So my guess is Kong and Godzilla might fight, but they're going to have to team up against this big villain. I'm not going to say any more, so I'll spoil it if you haven't seen it. But I really liked it. It's funny, when they started playing the Godzilla film, I got all excited. Then I'm like, oh wait, that's not the OC. I'm trying to remember who actually played it. I don't remember who played it, but I thought the renditions of the Akira Ifukube themes, which are amazing from the original Godzilla films, was nicely well done, and a nice homage, I think, to the original film. So all in all, I was like a kid in a candy store in that movie, and I remember numerous times during the film, you know, my wife went with me. She's a good sport. And, you know, she sees me with this big grin on my face, and she looks over and she goes, "You were totally loving this, are you?" I'm like, "I am." She's like, "You're such a big kid." I'm like, "I know." So Nick's got another question here. One more. What do you believe constitutes a good cover? I say it should retain the spirit of the original, but explore new territory. Example, the Cardigans cover of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Yeah, I mean, there are some covers which completely change the spirit of the original, where it's almost unrecognizable. You got to give bands credit for doing that, but then it's almost like, you know, you want to hear at least a little bit of the original. But then again, a note-for-note exact rendition of the original doesn't work either, because for that, I might as well just go listen to the original. So for me, and I know I've mentioned this song numerous times, I just talked about it the other day, Man for Man's Earth Band's Blinded by the Light is a perfect example of a cover that's the way to do it, okay? They kept the spirit of the original, just like Nick mentions, but completely transformed it, improved on it, okay? Turned it from like this kind of little folky tune into this pop/prog bombastic epic, which works on every level. I mean, it's just that's the way to do a cover song, guys. Bring your personality as a band into the song. Keep the general identity of the song intact, but add all your own flavors to it. Well done. That's the way it should be done. All right, from allmediareviews.blogspot.com, what is your take on Andre Matos and the bands he fronted? Angra, Shaman, Solo. I'm in mourning right now after learning he died last weekend at the young age of 47, and I don't recall you talking about him all that much. I do recall James Bickers, my former editor at Sea of Tranquility back in the magazine days, writing an article in Progression, 5 albums to get into progressive metal, and Angra's Angel's Cry was one of them. Maybe you remember that. Yeah, I do remember. That's from a long time ago. Yeah, that's really sad that Andre died. You know, he's been kind of like, I think he was one of those vocalists that back in the 90s, especially when he was in Angra, was probably the next big thing. And I think Angra never really kind of took off like everybody thought they would, and especially not after he left, because I think that you know, the Holy Land album for me is my favorite Angra album of all time, and that is a spectacular album. And I thought back in the day that was going to lead them to superstardom, and they did one more album with him, which was the Fireworks album, and then he left. And they've released some good albums since then, but they've kind of sputtered a bit. But a great singer. I mean, if you're going to go check out some of the stuff he did with Angra, you got to get them all, right? Angel's Cry is the debut. I like that a lot. Freedom Call is one of the EPs. That's good. Holy Land is spectacular. That, for me, is the one album to get from him. He's a powerhouse on that album. Fireworks is good. Also, you know, he appeared on a couple of the Avantasia albums. I think that was the Metal Opera Parts 1 and 2. He's on both of those. The Wicked Symphony he's on as well. You know, doesn't do as much on that album, but yeah, a great singer. I haven't heard any of the Shaman stuff or his solo albums. He's just kind of fallen under the radar for so many years. I mean, 47 is way too young to die, especially for such a talent. So yeah, I was very surprised and shocked when I heard that. From Arnaud B, one thought-provoking question for you, Pete. Considering that prog musicians cannot compose with the skill and the mastery of classical composers and cannot improvise with the skill and the mastery of jazz musicians, what is the genuine strength of progressive music? Well, I think the strength of progressive music always was, again, it's progressive rock, right? So they took traditional rock arrangements and song structures and greatly expanded on that by incorporating elements of classical and jazz and folk and world music and whatever else they could throw into the pot, stew pot, so to speak. And while you're absolutely right, I think that classical and jazz musicians, especially those schooled in those two genres, they're on a different level. There were a lot of prog rock musicians who had backgrounds in jazz or classical. There's a lot of guitar players that I know that wound up in, Steve Hackett comes to mind, and Fripp and Steve Howe, who had backgrounds in classical guitar and jazz and all that sort of thing. But not all the musicians in these bands. A lot of the, like bass players and drummers, well, Bill Bruford's an exception. He had a serious jazz background. But a lot of these guys, they cut their teeth on rock music. So they grew up in the 50s and the 60s and playing like the early rock stuff. That's what they did. So, but I think progressive rock, what made it so cool is that instead of, the typical 4/4 song structures and verse, chorus, they threw all that out the window. So, maybe we'll have a chorus, maybe we won't. Maybe the song will be dominated by, lots of guitar solos, and how about some keyboard solos too? Vocals take a backbeat a little bit, and let's make them kind of folky, and then let's throw some hard rock into it. So I think prog was just kind of like a melting pot of all these different styles, and that's what kind of made it so cool. Some comments came up from the last episode we did from one of our readers, and he made a good point. One of the questions was, how come to my ears, the viewers' ears, when I listen to some of these prog bands from the 70s and I listen to some of the jazz fusion from the 70s, it doesn't sound all that much different to me. And I think, and the viewer who pointed out that there's a lot of difference, absolutely correct. I mean, those players are on different levels, right? Much different backgrounds. And I think kind of the point that I was trying to make is that from the casual ear, on the surface, it doesn't seem like there's that much difference when you're hearing some of this stuff. But, in actuality, there is, because there's a huge background of traditional jazz, whether it be from the bebop era or what have you. And that's what made the big difference there. But I think, my point was that there were a lot of jazz guys in the early 70s who were really into what the proggers were doing. They said, let's try and add some rock flavors into our jazz and kind of do that. And a lot of the prog guys were thinking, well, we love what they're doing. Let's try and incorporate some jazz into their music. So you had like the 11th House and Mahavishnu and Lifetime and Weather Report and Return to Forever and Miles and all that kind of stuff. Guys like Yes and ELP and King Crimson and Gentle Giant and Genesis and all those bands. They were like, that's pretty cool. So you had, it was just, they were all contemporary. So you had like this kind of like little bleeding ground going on. But yeah, Vince's comment is that there's major differences in those bands. Yeah, of course, there absolutely is. There were a lot of elements in those jazz fusion albums that the proggers were never going to go into, but that's what made both of them great, And I think that the prog bands were also trying to throw some classical in there. They were trying to throw some Renaissance music in there, some avant-garde stuff. So I think, so back to Arnaud's point, is that the genuine strength of progressive music is that it pushed the boundaries of regular rock arrangements by incorporating elements from all these other genres. Okay, that's always kind of how I saw it. From Johnny Pero. Hello, Pete. This may be a silly question. I am much into live albums lately, and I wonder why many bands of the 70s and 80s recorded their albums in Japan, especially at Budokan. Why is that, and what makes that venue so special? Well, it's not just the Budokan. There are other, in Osaka, and there's a bunch of other venues in Japan that a lot of rock bands always love playing at. So, again, I've never been there, okay? I can only tell you what I've heard, what I've read, what I've listened to. From what I understand, speaking to some people who have played in venues in Japan, there's an acoustic nature in some of those buildings that is unmatched anywhere around the world, okay? Again, I haven't experienced it myself, but you've heard a lot of the albums. For whatever reason, a lot of those classic live albums recorded in Japan sound fucking great, right? I think also it has a lot to do with the audiences. Japanese audiences, when the bands are performing, They shut up, they watch, and they listen very quietly. From what I've heard, if you're a band and you're playing in Japan and you're playing a song and midway through the song you just stop, you'll hear a pin drop. That's how quiet they are. Whereas here in this country, people are drinking, they're talking, they're this, that, and the other thing, they're walking around, all this kind of stuff. Nobody just sits here and just really watches and listens to music. The Japanese fans do. They pay very close attention. As soon as that song is over and they know the song is over, then they erupt. Standing ovation, and that's what they do. They sit down, they shut up, band plays. So I think that's what a lot of kind of bands from this neck of the woods, our part of the world, love so much about going there, is how much the fans in Japan really appreciated the music they were playing and really stopped to listen to them. So, and I think both a lot of the arenas in Japan, the Budokan especially, I think they hold around 15,000 people, give or take a little bit. So I think that's a good size. It's not too big, it's not too small. So but look at you got Cheap Trick, Deep Purple, Priest, Dream Theater, Ozzy, Mr. Big, Bob Dylan, Clapton, Rainbow, the Chili Peppers. You can go on and on and on. Green Day, I think, released an album or two from the Budokan, and so many live albums from Japan. And most people love them. They sound great. All right, so there's a reason for it. Again, I haven't been there personally, but I think it has to do with the acoustics, but more importantly, it has to do with the fans. All right, they make a live album, in my opinion. For my good friend Chris Canzaneri, hey Pete, love the show, dude. My question is, what do you think of the first 4 Pantera albums? The band always refused to acknowledge their existence, but I think that was crazy. I know they had an image to maintain once they got huge, but I don't think those albums are actually bad at all, just different. You know what? Thanks for your question, Chris, my man. I hadn't heard these albums in a long time, and when I got this question 2 weeks ago, I went and I re-listened to all those 4 Pantera albums, all the ones prior to Cowboys from Hell. Those are damn good. And I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, they were a glam band before they did Cowboys from Hell. You know what? I wouldn't call those albums glam. They were just good American metal. And the albums in question are Metal Magic, Projects in the Jungle, I Am the Night, and Power Metal. So Power Metal was the first album with Phil Anselmo on lead vocals. The other 3 albums featured a guy named Terry Glaze on vocals, who to me sounds a lot like Joe Elliott from Def Leppard. There's a very strong Def Leppard vibe on those first 3 albums especially, mixed with some Kiss, because Dimebag was a big Kiss fan. Little hints of Dokken, I get, and I think on I Am the Night and Power Metal, the last 2 just prior to Cowboys from Hell, I get a lot of like Judas Priest and Sabotage feel. So I wouldn't call those albums glam at all. I wouldn't call them hair metal. It's just all right. Dimebag Darrell was a bona fide guitar hero at like 16 years old, and nobody knew it. You listen to his guitar work on those 4 albums, man, those first 4 albums, fucking great. That guy is shredding his balls off. And again, nobody heard those albums, right? And I really wish they would reissue those albums, because I would absolutely pick them up. Very strong. I urge any of you to go back and listen to those albums. A lot of really good stuff on there. Good question, Chris. From Leaf Siklasi, okay at the end. Ever since I owned the LP Southern Fried Rock, I've been a fan of Southern rock. Lately, though, I've been listening to a parallel style known as country rock that was primarily based on the West Coast. I know you like Southern rock. What's your opinion of the country rock genre? I like a lot of it, too. At times I wish there was a little more rock in some of that country rock stuff, but I think the songwriting was really there. And a lot of really good bands kind of dabbled in that style. Obviously the Eagles are the most famous of all of them. But, how about the Byrds? Byrds had a lot of great songs. Poco were a really, really strong band. A lot of great stuff. I think Poco could have been huge, and they just never quite hit I think the Eagles were like the benchmark at that time period. Poco kind of in their shadow, but a lot of really good tunes. One of the early bands in that style, Flying Burrito Brothers, and then Graham Parsons solo. There's some really good Flying Burrito Brothers stuff. Again, probably a little more country than a lot of people, if you're not into that, if you're more of a rock person. Flying Burrito Brothers, especially the first 2 albums, might be a little more country than some people like, but their last couple, after Graham left, a little more rockin'. Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, another good band. Some of the Buffalo Springfield stuff, all right, that qualifies. A lot of Neil Young's early albums, other than the more rockin' stuff with Crazy Horse there, that's kind of country rock right there. Pure Prairie League, strong band. Firefall, I always like Firefall. Ozark Mountain Daredevils. lot more than just that one big hit, you know. They get some good stuff. The Amazing Rhythm Aces, you know, all really strong bands. And, you know, I know they qualify as a Southern rock band, both of these, because they're from the South. And, you know, they toured with all the Southern rock bands of the day. But, you know, Marshall Tucker Band, as well as a lot of the Charlie Daniels stuff, and even a little bit of the Outlaws, were kind of in that country rock style. But, again, they were from the South, so always been known as Southern rock bands. But they kind of like, you know, perpetuated and permeated both of those little styles. So, good question. A lot of good bands there to discover. From Thomas Sharpless, while I know that you, like me, have little use for most of the LA glam bands of the late 80s, otherwise known as the hair metal bands, with the few exceptions that you mentioned in the past, what are your thoughts on Stryper? I know that you are not a big lyrics guy, so I assume the content of their lyrics shouldn't be an issue for you, and musically they are heads above virtually every band from the LA scene. Back in the 80s, even many of my atheist friends found their music to be a shade above the vast majority of the trendy popular bands. The twin guitar attack, they have a thing of beauty, a la Thin Lizzy. Given your good taste in music, I find it strange that I've not heard you mention Stryper in any of your segments. I don't mean to open up a can of worms in any way. Simply put, I respect your taste in music, and given Stryper's serious musical chops, would you think that you find them to be top-notch for that genre? Your thoughts on this are appreciated. I didn't bring my water. Damn it. I was into Stryper for a couple of years. All right, when the Yellow and Black Attack, Soldiers Under Command, and To Hell with the Devil came out, I was into those albums. I kind of tired of their whole approach after a while because I found, you know, that was right around the time where thrash was becoming huge. And, you know, quite frankly, a lot of the thrash and then the early death metal stuff took more of like an evil kind of tone to their music. And I found the overt Christian approach of Stryper and their kind of, I mean, all the Stryper songs are so like kind of like happy and, you know, hey, and I just really lost interest. So I actually don't own any of those albums anymore, although I do have a kind of like hits collection, which has some good tunes on there. Haven't listened to it in a million years, but fantastic players. You're absolutely true. And I think that's what drew me to them right away. I mean, you got, you know, Michael Sweet is a great singer. I think his vocals, though, after a couple of albums, though, started to grate on me a little because it's just so up there in the stratosphere all the time and kind of, you know, real syrupy at times. But, man, those guys could play, you know. Michael and Oz Fox, killer guitar players. And I always really liked that aspect of their music. So some really good songs on those couple albums. I always respected them. I just don't listen to them anymore, really. So that's the reason why I don't really talk about them. But yeah, nothing but respect for Stryper. From the Inspired Amateurs. Hey, Pete, I'm a regular viewer. Love to watch your videos. Can you tell me which you prefer, Selling England by the Pound or The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway? All right, I've been staying away from questions like this in recent episodes because, you know, it's just a one-word answer or whatever, but I want to get into this a little bit. So I really, really respect the hell out of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I think it's a very good album. It's a classic album. It's got some great songs on it, great musicianship. Peter's vocals are awesome on it, and it's one of the most important concept albums of all time, I think, especially in the prog genre, but in rock and roll in general. However, Selling England by the Pound is top to bottom just great, right? There's no, I'm not trying to say that The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway has any filler, but, you know, would that album be even a tad bit stronger if it was condensed slightly? Perhaps. But I just think that there's more standout classic tracks on Selling England by the Pound. If you're going to look at by track perspective, there's just tunes on Selling England which are, you know, Genesis staples that are landmark classic tunes. And while there's plenty of really strong stuff on The Lamb, if I put both albums back to back, I think Selling England just kind of a couple notches above. Okay, it's not to discredit The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. There's going to be probably plenty of people out there who are going to be like, "No, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is the best thing they ever did," and that's great if you think so. And I think it's definitely an awesome album. I mean, you know, the question here is which one do I prefer? I prefer Selling England by the Pound. From Michael Morgan, hey Pete, my question is more of a rant. I hear about all these top 10 or top 100 lists. They don't seem to work because everyone disagrees. I feel that bands, artists, singers, movies, etc. can't be considered better or worse than something or someone else. There are too many different styles and such. What is your opinion? My first time on your show. I am just now subscribed. Cool. Well, thank you for your subscription. I hope you like the videos. I mean, you know, here's the deal. I look at doing the, you know, top 10 songs and the classic album war show and all this kind of stuff. It's not so much the opinion of which I think is better or what I think are the better songs or which album is better than the other or, you know, so on and so forth. It more I think it's more important that you're giving these albums or these songs some love, and you're discussing them. In the end, quite frankly, I'll look at the Classic Album War show. Does it really matter which album that I'm comparing is the best in my opinion? No. What's more important is that we're talking about them. We're giving the music and the album some love, or the band some love. I think it's more important to discuss stuff. It doesn't really matter in the end what is chosen as the favorite of the person or people who are discussing them. That really matters nothing. What matters is that, and as far as I'm concerned, like me doing these type of shows, me doing top 10 song shows, or me doing a Classic Album War shows, is not so you can hear me, go on and on about what I think are the best, what are my favorites. It's more about, am I intriguing you enough to go back and either re-listen to those songs or those albums again, or if you've never heard them before, to be intrigued enough to go check them out for the first time. I can't speak for everybody else on the internet who's doing, comparison shows. All right, that's the reason for them doing it is their reason. My reason for doing these is not just so you can hear which ones I like better. Quite frankly, that's not important at all. What's important is you get to hear me talk about why these songs or these albums are special, so that you go out and listen to them, either for the first time or for the millionth time. That's the reason why I do it. So, Michael, I know everybody disagrees. That's what the world is all about, right? We all have different opinions. We have different ears. We perceive things differently. So I would spend less time worrying about what's actually chosen as the best or the winners, and just go and investigate the music, okay? Because that's what it's all about. From Motor Breath, hey Pete, I haven't listened to death metal in a long while. I used to in my late teens, early 20s, but then I really got into prog as well as classic rock acts. I found my listening rotation in the last few years to be rotating between heavy metal, prog, and classic rock. But lately, I've had the itch for death metal and a more technical aptitude. I don't know why this is, but I just have. Any recommendations for someone who has been exposed to the genre before, but has been away for a really long time? Cheers. Yeah, we've kind of covered this before, but I'll list off some again. So some of my favorite technical death metal bands, and again, I think I like the more technical bands because I like kind of complex and technical music, based on my, big love for prog, right? So I gravitate towards bands like Immolation, Nile. I think Nile is my favorite death metal band. Decrepit Birth, Gorguts, Spawn of Possession, Cattle Decapitation, Origin, Obscura. Obscura are fantastic. I urge everybody to check out Obscura. Great mix of death metal, prog, and jazz fusion. Fantastic. Suffocation. Okay, how about Death? That's kind of where it all started, right? Atheist, another great early band. Psychroptic, Cryptopsy, Morbid Angel, Pestilence. These are some of the classic bands. Brain Drill. How about early Opeth? All right, that's totally technical death metal mixed with a lot of prog and folk. Revocation, Rivers of Nihil, Between the Buried and Me. More of a progressive metal band, but they have a lot of death metal elements, especially in their early stuff. Necrophagist, and even some Behemoth. Behemoth kind of borders the fine line between death metal and black metal, but most of their stuff is pretty technical. So you have a lot of stuff to check out there. Motor Breath. From Eliphas Desney. Hi, Pete. Which one is your favorite Hipgnosis album cover art? I think what I'm going to do, I've been talking for a long time about doing my favorite album cover show, but I think what I'm going to do, instead of just doing one show with all sorts of crap, I'm going to pick specific, Hipgnosis and Roger Dean and Rodney Matthews, and then maybe do a mix show. But I would love to do it and a show all on Hipgnosis stuff. But I'll throw a few out. How about Zeppelin's Houses of the Holy, Wishbone Ash Argus, Renaissance Prologue, as well as Turn of the Cards. I think Hipgnosis did most of the Renaissance album covers. Tofat, their self-titled debut. That's pretty wild album cover. Styx Pieces of Eight, UFO Obsession. Hipgnosis did a lot of UFO album covers. That's all I'm going to throw out there now, because I think I'm going to do a whole show on Hipgnosis album cover art. From Robert Stacy, Sammy Hagar, the new album. What do you think? And at 70s, he still can sing. Dave, sit done, Waldo. I think he meant to say sit down, Waldo. Listen, I have always thought that Sammy Hagar was a better singer than David Lee Roth. Always. David Lee Roth was a showman. I don't know if he was ever that much of a great singer, although you can't deny those first, 4 or 5 Van Halen albums, right? I mean, come on. I always thought Sammy was a better singer, but the best Van Halen material was those first bunch of albums. But in saying that, yeah, Sammy is 71 years old? How old is Sammy, guys? I don't know. He's 70, 71, 72, something like that. That guy can still sing like a motherfucker, right? As far as, so I listened to the new Circle album recently. I haven't bought it, but I listened to it. I like some of it. Some of it was kind of like, it's okay. But he sounds great on it, as always. Sammy, the Chicken Foot stuff, all his solo albums, he sounded great on all those Van Halen albums. And God, you go back to the first two Matos albums, man. Guy's a freak of nature. But I think he's always taken care of himself, right? And I think he's going to continue to sing, really, really well into his 70s. And he's a rich man. He doesn't need to do this, but he plays rock and roll just for the fun of it. So, yeah, Sammy rules. I totally agree. From Darciska, let's cross over your love of comics and music. 1, if any band could become superheroes or villains, which band would you love to see covered in comic form? And 2, which superheroes or villains would make for a great prog or metal act? All right, so I think as far as which band could become superheroes or villains, I think that, all right, got to choose the black metal bands, right? So I think Mayhem or Immortal or Dimmu Borgir would make great villains with the the corpse paint and the long hair and the spikes, and I mean they would be a great kind of villain team, I think. And as far as superheroes or villains that would make a great prog or metal act, how about I always loved the Wrecking Crew, led by the Wrecker. And his band of villains. I think they would be a great heavy metal act. Imagine out there with the crowbar and a guitar and the ball and chain and on bass. It's just, I think it would be a really cool kind of metal act. And then a prog act, I think the Defenders would be a great prog act. Imagine seeing Doctor Strange out there on the vocals, Hulk sitting behind the drum kit, okay, Namor the Submariner on bass, Silver Surfer on guitar, or maybe you got, Nighthawk on guitar, or Valkyrie on guitar, on keyboards, or whatever. I don't know. It'd be kind of cool. Silly question, but a cool question. Thank you. From Jamie Laszlo. I'll understand if this question is too far off the beaten path to answer, but here it goes. It's 1983. You're 16 and driving to the local arcade while blasting your favorite tunes. You park the car and walk into the arcade. Separate Ways by Journey is playing on the speakers, and you have a pocket full of quarters. What game is sucking the most quarters out of your pocket? For me, Tron, Galaga, and Elevator Action were my go-to games. Jamie, you and I must have lived the same life. It's amazing how many things in common we have. Yeah, that's what we did back in the day. Either when we first started driving or even before we started driving, my parents would drop me and the guys, my brother and my buddies off at the mall, and we'd go right to the arcade and we'd just play our favorite games. And yeah, you know what? They always played Separate Ways, because Journey was huge at the time. So I think some of my favorite games, Tron, absolutely. I love the Tron game. Galaga has always been my favorite video game. And I'm not much of a video game guy now. I haven't been for a long time. But man, if I go into any place that has arcade games now and they got Galaga, I go right to it. Donkey Kong I liked a bit. Asteroids I played quite a bit. Space Invaders, obviously. And I played a bit of Pac-Man. But yeah, Tron and Galaga were my two favorites by far. Used to go to the old Orange Plaza in Middletown, New York. I think it was called Time Out, I think the name of the arcade was. Something like that. I don't know if any of you guys are Hudson Valley guys. I think it was called Time Out, right? No, whatever. From K. Andrew Headland. Do you have any opinion on or reviews of the current rock metal bands that have recorded new material in the 2010s? Groups on my playlist include Dream Child, Revolution Saints, Dead Daisies, Rival Sun, and Ghost. And P.S. I'm seeing Ghost in October. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good rock and metal bands that are coming out lately. Jesus, you mentioned a couple there that are from the Frontiers label. Dream Child is basically like a couple ex-Dio guys putting together a really good band that sounds like classic Dio. Revolution Saints is great. In fact, Revolution Saints, Dead Daisy, Doug Aldrich, guitar player, Rival Sun is one of the best rock bands going out there today. I mean, if you haven't heard that new Rival Sons album, man, you need to check it out. It's fantastic. Ghost I like. I'm getting a little kind of leery of the whole image thing with Ghost, and we'll see where their kind of music goes, because I see they're really loving being in the mainstream now, and I wonder if that kind of hurts them going on. But I've liked all their stuff, and they're good live. So I would say if you really need to check out my What's Hot shows here on the channel, because that's where I talk about and review a lot of these new releases. So a lot of these bands I've discussed in depth over the last couple of years. So go into the playlist, okay, Mr. K. Andrew. Go into the playlist and go to the new product shows, the What's Hot shows, and start watching those, because that's all I do is talk about new releases, and I've been doing those for going on 5 years. And last but not least, from Raymond Kaiser, Okay, Pete, you like to say how you don't care for Stephen Pearcy's vocals from Rat, but do you consider someone like Geddy Lee to be a fantastic vocalist? If Rush had had a better singer, would they have had more popular appeal, and especially to females? Just wondering what your take on this is. Well, you know what? I think Rush always had plenty of popular appeal. I mean, Rush did very well for themselves throughout their career. And I knew and know a lot of women who like the music of Rush. But in saying that, no, Geddy is not a great singer, but Geddy's vocals always fit the music of Rush. And while, Geddy, God, this is a really good question because, Geddy doesn't have a lot of range. He kind of did that kind of high-pitched shrieking, and he did it really well. But it fit the music. And I think when Geddy's voice started to kind of change a bit as he got older, a lot of people were like, oh, that's a little different. I'd rather hear Geddy the old way he sang. I like the high-pitched stuff, So I think that the Geddy Lee of more recent years, with that more of a mid-range thing, probably more appealing to mainstream people who aren't Rush fans. But by then, it's Rush were more of an album band, not like doing singles and stuff like that. So I don't know. Personally, I'd rather listen to Geddy Lee any day over Stephen Pearcy. I just never liked his vocals. I just think Stephen truly one-dimensional vocal style. Did it fit some of the music of Rat? Yeah, but I think after just a couple of years, you could already hear the crowd. He was a terrible singer live, whereas Geddy was always good live. So I don't know if Rush had a different singer. Yeah, but you got to look at 70s Rush. It's not like kind of hit material, so to speak. But I think Rush had a lot of good radio staples in the '80s with Geddy singing. So I don't know. It's a good question. Geddy's not a fantastic vocalist, never was, but really suited to the music they played, I always thought. So anyway, guys, that's it for this week. So leave your questions in the comments and feedback below, and I will check them out and pick some to go over and discuss in our next video, hopefully next weekend or the week after. Till then, visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're on the mighty YouTube, often. A lot of good stuff coming up, so stay tuned. Probably I'm going to be out of action for a couple days because I'll be in Boston, Massachusetts on a quick little business trip, but I'll be back and we'll get right back to stuff, all right? So we'll see you real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.